9 experienced hikers, a well-planned route, perfect weather at the start. They set up camp on a snowy mountain slope on the night of February the 1st, 1959. By morning, all 9 were dead. Their tent had been cut open from the inside, their bodies found scattered across the snow, some barely dressed, in temperatures of -30 degrees. One was missing her tongue, several had catastrophic internal injuries, with no external wounds. The Soviet investigation lasted 3 months. Their conclusion: death by an unknown compelling force. That file was sealed for 30 years. This is the Dyatlov Pass incident, and more than 65 years later, it remains the most disturbing unsolved mystery in the history of human exploration. Hidden epochs, where forgotten history speaks. Part 2. Who they were. January 1959. The Soviet Union. A group of 10 students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute set out on a ski trek through the northern Ural Mountains. Their leader was Igor Dyatlov, 23 years old, experienced, calm, and methodical. He had completed dozens of difficult expeditions. This one was rated Category 2, difficult but well within the group's abilities. The others were just like him, young, fit, trained. Several had military experience. These were not amateurs stumbling into the wilderness. These were the best hikers the Soviet Union produced. Their destination, Mount Otorten, a name that in the local Mansi language means, "Don't go there." On January 28th, one member turned back due to illness, Yuri Yudin. He said goodbye to his 9 friends, watching them disappear into the snow. He was the only one who would ever come home. On February the 1st, the group reached the slope of a mountain called Kholat Syakhl, in Mansi, Mountain of the Dead. They decided to camp on the open slope rather than descend to shelter. It was the last decision Igor Dyatlov ever made. Part 3. The Discovery. When the group failed to report in on schedule, a search party was sent. On February 26th, they found the tent. What they saw made no sense. The tent was still standing, but it had been cut open from the inside, in multiple places, with a knife, not torn by wind. Deliberately cut, as if someone needed to escape immediately, and had no time to use the entrance. Inside, all their equipment, all their food, all their warm clothing, their boots, their coats, everything, left behind. The footprints in the snow led away from the tent, down the slope toward the tree line. The footprints were calm, orderly. They were not running, they were walking, in socks, in -30 degrees, without shoes. 2 kilometers from the tent, under a large cedar tree, they found the first 2 bodies, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko, in their underwear, their hands burned. They had been trying to make a fire. The branches above them were broken high up, as if someone had climbed the tree, trying to see something in the darkness. Then they found Igor Dyatlov, face down in the snow, facing back toward the tent, as if he had been trying to crawl home. Then Zinaida Kolmogorova, then Rustem Slobodin, who had a fracture in his skull, not severe enough to kill him. He had died of the cold. All 5 had frozen to death, but 4 were still missing. Part 4. The Ravine. 2 months later, in May, when the snow finally melted, the last 4 were found. They were in a ravine, buried under 4 meters of snow. These four were better dressed than the others. They had taken clothing from the first two who died. Someone had been thinking clearly enough to try to survive, but what the autopsies revealed was unlike anything the investigators had ever seen. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol had massive skull fractures. Lyudmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotarev had catastrophic chest injuries, multiple broken ribs on both sides. The force required to cause those fractures was comparable to a car crash at high speed, but there were no external wounds, no bruising on the skin, no cuts, no marks. And Lyudmila Dubinina, her tongue was missing, her eyes were missing. Soft tissue, gone. The Soviet investigator wrote in his notes, "I have been in this profession for 20 years. I have never seen anything like this." The case was immediately classified. The families were told their children had died of natural causes and were not permitted to ask questions. Part 5. The Theories. For 60 years, the sealed files and bizarre evidence fueled theory after theory. The KGB theory. Soviet secret agents killed the hikers because they witnessed a classified military test. Supporters pointed to the sealed files, the orange glow witnesses reported in the sky that night, and traces of radiation found on 2 of the bodies. The Yeti theory. Local Mansi people spoke of a creature in those mountains. Some investigators took this seriously. The infrasound theory, that natural wind patterns in the mountains created a frequency that caused mass panic and hallucinations, forcing the hikers to flee in terror. The military weapons theory, that a new Soviet munition was tested in the area, creating a shockwave that caused the internal injuries with no external marks. Each theory explained some things. None explained everything. And then, in 2019, Russia quietly did something extraordinary. They reopened the case. Part 6. New Evidence. In 2019, the Russian government officially reopened the Dyatlov Pass investigation for the first time in 60 years. Their conclusion, announced in 2020, a slab avalanche. Not a massive wall of snow, a small, localized slab. A layer of compressed snow that detached from the slope and slid over the tent while the hikers slept. This would explain the internal injuries with no external marks. Snow pressing with enormous force can crush ribs without leaving a bruise. It would explain the cut tent, the missing boots, the panic. But critics had one major objection. The slope at Dyatlov Pass is only 23 degrees. Avalanches don't happen at that angle, and no one in the region had ever reported seeing an avalanche there. Then, 2 Swiss scientists built a computer simulation using snow physics software. Their model showed that a small slab avalanche was not only possible at that angle, it was plausible, still not proven. But then came the expeditions. In 2021, 2 separate teams traveled to Dyatlov Pass. They confirmed the slope was actually steeper than originally measured and found conditions consistent with avalanche formation. In January 2022, exactly 63 years after the hikers were last seen alive, 2 mountain guides reached the pass in conditions nearly identical to that night and filmed 2 fresh slab avalanches. In January 2023, a new slab avalanche was photographed on the same mountain, 700 meters from where the tent once stood. The avalanche that nobody believed could happen there had now been documented 3 years in a row. Part 7. in remembrance of those who are no longer with us. Does the avalanche theory explain everything? Not quite. It doesn't fully explain the missing tongue and eyes. Forensic experts suggest post-mortem decay after months under snow. But some investigators remain unconvinced. It doesn't explain the radiation found on 2 items of clothing. And it doesn't explain the orange glow that multiple witnesses reported in the sky that night. The Russian government's official position is avalanche. The Swiss scientists' position is avalanche. The physical evidence increasingly points toward avalanche. But here is what we know for certain. 9 people who were skilled, trained, and experienced chose to cut open their tent and walk into -30-degree darkness. In their socks. They climbed trees. They built fires with bare hands. They tore clothing off the dead to keep themselves alive a little longer. Whatever they were running from, they were terrified of it. More terrified than they were of freezing to death. The pass was named after Igor Dyatlov in 1959. It carries his name to this day. Subscribe to Hidden Epochs, a new mystery every week. The past is never truly buried.